In the gleaming heart of an alien empire, where power is measured by crowns and conquests, a quiet human janitor holds the galaxy's most unspoken secret. When he gently whispers to the deaf daughter of the alien queen, the words that escape his lips stir something deep inside her, something ancient, something forgotten. In a world where every action is scrutinized, one conversation could change everything. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The grand hall of the Threxian palace hummed with power. Alien delegates, adorned in jeweled robes, gathered in their usual circles, discussing treaties and trade. Beneath them, Elias Ward, the human janitor, silently scrubbed the marble floors, unseen by most, a ghost in the shadows of the empire. Princess Zora sat at a long table, her fingers tracing patterns in the air, practicing her silent language. Deaf, she had always communicated through gestures, her voice a quiet part of a world that ignored her. But as she observed Elias, something stirred inside her. There was something different about him, the way he moved with purpose, the quiet strength in his demeanor. Zora watched him for what felt like an eternity, drawn to the stillness in his actions. She had never spoken to him, nor had she ever thought to. But today was different. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Why do you clean what no one sees?" Elias paused, looking up at her, the words lingering between them. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes locked with hers, and after a moment, he leaned down, his voice low. "Because the work is never truly done, princess. The world forgets, but the floors remember." Zora froze, not just at his words, but at the quiet truth they carried. It was simple, yet profound. Something in her shifted. She looked at him not as a servant, but as someone who understood the world she lived in, even if no one else did. Before she could speak again, the doors to the hall cracked open. The queen entered, her presence commanding. Zora quickly looked away, but the echo of Elias's words lingered in her mind. The palace was not just a place of power, there was something beneath its surface, and for the first time, Zora felt it. The queen's arrival changed the atmosphere in the palace. Delegates immediately shifted in their seats, bowing in reverence, their voices lowering. Zora's attention, however, remained on Elias, the janitor who had quietly stirred something within her. The queen's gaze swept across the room, settling momentarily on Zora. Her daughter, sitting apart from the court, had never been one to follow the rigid protocols of palace life. The queen's eyes flickered with an unsettling mixture of curiosity and control. "Zora," the queen's voice rang out, smooth and commanding. "What is this? Why are you here?" Zora straightened in her seat. She had spent years in the palace, always following her mother's demands, but today was different. "I was talking," she said slowly, her hands tracing the air. To the janitor, the queen's gaze turned cold. "You speak to him?" Zora nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, he listens." The queen's lips tightened, but she did not speak further. Her eyes, hard as obsidian, lingered on her daughter before turning to the room. A ripple of murmurs spread through the court, but the queen ignored them. "What does he have to offer you, Zora?" the queen asked, her voice low but firm. Zora hesitated, her thoughts racing. "He has shown me something the court does not." The queen's gaze softened just slightly, a warning. "You are the future of this empire, Zora. Do not forget your place." Zora nodded, but the words stung. The empire she had been raised to rule had never shown her the truth Elias had. The palace had fallen back into its routine, but for Zora, nothing felt normal anymore. The queen had retreated to her chambers, her face an unreadable mask as she pondered what had transpired. The air in the palace had thickened, charged with an energy that Zora could almost taste. But she couldn't ignore the unsettling truth that had begun to form in her mind. Her mother's wrath was coming, and it would be unlike anything she had ever faced before. Zora couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the palace around her. She could hear the distant murmur of voices, the soft footsteps of guards outside her door. But all of it felt distant, muted. Nothing mattered but the growing tension between her and the queen. Elias's words echoed in her mind. because the work is never truly done. She had never paid much attention to the simple lives of the palace staff. After all, they were nothing but servants in the grand scheme of things. But Elias, in his quiet way, had made her see something. Maybe it was the way he had stood still, untouched by the chaos around him. Maybe it was the way his voice had felt like a whisper of truth, simple yet profound. The next morning, Zora found herself standing in front of the Queen's chambers, her heart racing. She had tried to prepare herself for this moment, but nothing could ready her for what was coming. The Queen's voice was cold when she spoke. "Zora," she began, her eyes as hard as the throne she sat upon. "You have embarrassed me. Do you understand the weight of what you've done?" Zora opened her mouth to respond, but the Queen held up a hand, silencing her. "You speak to a janitor, a man whose name no one even remembers. You've lowered yourself, and in doing so, you've brought shame upon our entire lineage." The words struck like a blow. Zora flinched, but she refused to back down. She had felt the power of Elias's presence in a way her mother never could. She had felt something real, something that the Queen's world of control and power could never give her. "I didn't lower myself, Mother," Zora said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "I found something that you couldn't even see." The Queen's eyes darkened, her lips curling into a tight frown. "Enough," she snapped. "I will not tolerate this. If you continue this foolishness, you will face the consequences. You will learn that the palace runs on order, not on whispers from the lower classes." Zora held her ground, but inside, something shifted. The Queen's fury was palpable, but it wasn't directed at her alone. It was directed at the world Elias had shown her, a world beyond her mother's control, and it terrified the Queen. The days following the confrontation with her mother were filled with a tension Zora couldn't shake. She went through the motions of royal life, attending meetings, learning the intricacies of court politics, and enduring the cold glares of the nobility. But every moment, her mind kept drifting back to Elias, to the janitor who had listened when no one else had, who saw her not as a princess, but as someone who longed for something real. Her mother's warning echoed in her ears, but it didn't hold the same weight it once had. Zora felt a deep restlessness that she could no longer ignore. She found herself slipping away from the palace whenever she could, wandering the quiet halls where only the servants and laborers worked. It was here, beneath the polished marble and gleaming chandeliers, that Zora felt a strange sense of peace. Here, where no one cared for titles or status, she felt closer to the truth of who she was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the courtyard, Zora found herself in the lower corridors, a place she had never dared explore as a child. The air smelled of old stone and dust, but there was something about it that felt grounding. She paused at the entrance to the maintenance hall, where she had seen Elias working the day before. Elias was there, just as she had expected. His back was bent over a set of cleaning tools, his face still hidden in the shadows. But the moment she stepped into the room, he looked up, his expression calm but alert. "You again," he said, his voice soft, yet steady. There was no surprise in his tone, as if he had been waiting for her. Zora stood still, feeling the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her. She had been told her whole life that she was above this place, above the people who worked here. But now, standing before Elias, she felt something shift. For the first time in her life, she realized that she didn't have to be above anyone. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I needed to be here." Elias didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, as if he understood. He gestured toward a small bench where they could sit. "The floors always feel quieter when the palace is asleep," he said. "It's when you can hear the stories." Zora sat down, her heart beating faster in her chest. "What do you mean? Stories?" He smiled faintly. "The walls remember, just like the floors do. Every step, every word, every silence. The stories are all around us, if we know how to listen." Zora's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you hear them? Not just hear," Elias said, his voice quiet but sure. "I clean them." It was a simple answer, but it left Zora with a new understanding. Elias didn't just work in the palace, he understood it in ways no one else could, and suddenly, The palace that had always felt so foreign, so rigid, seemed to open up to her in a way it never had before. The days that followed were marked by a subtle shift in the palace. Zora found herself seeking out Elias more often, their moments together becoming more frequent, though always in secret. There was something magnetic about his quiet strength, something she could never put into words but felt deep within her bones. And with each passing day, her curiosity grew not just about him, but about the world he had quietly opened to her. But the Queen had noticed. As the days passed, Zora felt the weight of her mother's scrutiny on her every move. The subtle glances, the thinly veiled disapproval. It wasn't long before the Queen summoned her to the royal chambers for what felt like the inevitable reckoning. Zora stood before her mother, the weight of the entire palace pressing down on her. The Queen's eyes were cold and calculating, her lips set in a tight line as she stared at her daughter. Zora could feel the tension building in the air, thick and suffocating. "Zora." The Queen's voice was low, the edge sharp enough to cut. "You've been spending far too much time with the servants, the janitor especially. You have embarrassed yourself, and, by extension, me." Zora straightened, her hands trembling but her resolve growing. "I don't understand, Mother. He is beneath you." The Queen's voice rose and Zora flinched. "And you, my daughter, are the future of this empire. Your role is to lead, to inspire, not to associate with those who clean our floors and maintain our halls." Zora opened her mouth to argue, but her mother's glare silenced her. "You have proven yourself unworthy of the respect we've worked so hard to earn." Zora's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to shout, to scream that she wasn't like the others, that she was more than just a crown and a title. But the words caught in her throat. The Queen's authority was suffocating, a weight she couldn't lift. "You will face a trial," the Queen continued, her voice a cold decree. "A trial to prove your loyalty to your bloodline, to prove you understand your place." Zora's eyes widened. A trial? It was the last thing she expected, and yet somehow, she had known it was coming. The Queen was not one to be defied without consequence. "A trial?" Zora whispered, barely able to speak. "What kind of trial?" The Queen's lips curled into a tight smile. "You will face the consequences of your actions. You will prove that you belong to this world, to me." Before Zora could say anything more, two guards stepped forward, their faces unreadable. The Queen's gaze turned cold once more, and Zora knew that she had no choice but to obey. As they led her away, her mind raced. The trial would not be about her ability to lead, it would be about her willingness to obey. The power of her mother's will was all-consuming. But Zora's heart, for the first time, beat not with fear, but with determination. Elias had shown her a different world, and if she had to face this trial, she would do so with a quiet strength of her own. Zora stood at the center of the tribunal hall, her back straight and her heart pounding. The room felt impossibly vast, the high ceilings stretching far above her. The cold stone beneath her feet seemed to echo with every step she took, a reminder of the weight of her actions and the eyes that watched her every move. The Queen, seated on her throne, gazed down at her with unblinking, judgmental eyes. Around them, the court was silent, every noble and delegate waiting for the trial to begin. Zora's pulse raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had never imagined a day like this. A trial was not just a formality, it was a test of her very place in the palace, her worth as the Queen's daughter. She had always believed her position was secure, her future written in the stars. But now, standing before the Queen in the heart of the court, that certainty felt fragile. The Queen's voice broke the silence. "Zora, you have chosen to speak to the janitor, to lower yourself to his level. Now, you will show us your worth. You will prove your loyalty to your bloodline." The words stung, but Zora did not flinch. She had already made her decision, whether she realized it or not. The Queen's authority, though powerful, no longer felt absolute to her. There was something beyond this throne, beyond the crown, that had begun to awaken inside her, a new understanding of herself, of what it meant to be truly seen. "Step forward," the Queen commanded. Zora moved toward her, every step heavy with the weight of expectations she no longer cared to meet. Behind her, a guard brought forward a pedestal, Upon it lay an ancient, glowing artifact, a crystal orb that pulsed with an inner light, casting strange shadows across the floor. The Queen's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she looked at the orb. "This is a trial of the mind," she said. "You will solve the puzzle inside the orb. Failure will prove your lack of worth." Zora's breath caught in her throat. She had heard of the orb before, a legendary test of intellect that few had ever passed. But she also knew something the Queen didn't. This was not just a trial of the mind, it was a trial of the heart. As she approached the pedestal, the orb's light seemed to call to her, drawing her in with an energy she couldn't explain. It wasn't just a puzzle, it was a language, a silent conversation. Zora closed her eyes, her fingers brushing the surface of the orb. The light flared, and for a moment she could hear it, the hum of the universe, the pulse of the stars. Her mind raced, but then something inside her clicked. She didn't need to solve the puzzle with her intellect alone. She needed to listen. She needed to feel. She pressed her hand more firmly against the orb, focusing not on the shifting patterns but on the silent language that flowed beneath them. The light changed, swirling into intricate patterns that seemed to speak to her. The same silent language Elias had shown her, the language of the heart. The room around her fell away. The orb's glow intensified, illuminating the entire hall, and Zora understood. The puzzle wasn't a test of her intellect, it was a test of her connection to something deeper, to the truth that lay beneath the surface of this cold, controlling world. The Queen's expression remained unchanged, but Zora felt a shift in the air. The orb's light flickered one final time, and Zora took a deep breath, her heart steady. She had passed. The room was still. The orb's light slowly dimmed, casting long shadows over the tribunal hall. Zora stood motionless, her hand still resting on the crystal. The silence stretched like a taut wire, the weight of the entire palace pressing down on her. The Queen did not speak, her expression unreadable as she watched her daughter, her gaze unwavering. Zora could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had solved the puzzle not with her mind, but with something deeper, something that no one else could see. The trial, which had seemed impossible, had now become her moment of truth. But she wasn't sure if she had won, or if she had only set in motion something she couldn't control. The Queen leaned forward on her throne, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Impressive," she said, her voice laced with an icy calmness. "But your trial is not yet over." Zora's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Queen's lips curled into a tight smile. "The trial of loyalty was just the beginning. Now you will prove your worth as the future of this empire." Zora's eyes widened. The Queen stood, her towering presence filling the room, and with a single sweeping gesture, she motioned for the guards to step forward. "We will test your allegiance, Zora," the Queen continued, her voice cold as the space between them seemed to grow. "You will choose your place in this world, and you will choose now." The guards advanced, each one carrying a ceremonial dagger. The sight of them sent a chill down Zora's spine. This was not a test of intellect anymore. This was something darker, more visceral. Zora's thoughts raced. She had always believed that her mother's word was absolute, that her future was bound by blood and duty. But now, standing before her with the weight of the world on her shoulders, she knew there was something else she had to confront. Something that had nothing to do with power, rank, or royalty. Elias's quiet strength echoed in her mind, the way he had listened, the way he had taught her that the world didn't have to be ruled by fear. She thought of his words, "The work is never truly done." She thought of the way he had quietly carried his burdens, of how he had remained steadfast in his purpose, even when no one noticed. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She straightened, her heart no longer racing in fear, but steady with resolve. She had seen a world beyond the palace, a world that didn't care for crowns or titles, a world where truth wasn't spoken through power, but through connection. "I choose," she said, her voice ringing clear and strong in the silence, "to stand with what is true, not with the throne, but with the heart of the people." The Queen's eyes flickered with something, a flash of something Zora couldn't quite place. Surprise? Anger? Maybe both. But Zora was no longer afraid. She had chosen her path, and she wasn't backing down. The silence in the hall was deafening. Zora stood firm, her resolve unshaken as she faced her mother. The queen's eyes, once cold and impervious, now flickered with something deeper, something that might have been surprise or, perhaps, something even more dangerous, doubt. The air between them seemed to crackle, a storm ready to break. Zora could feel the weight of her decision hanging in the balance. Her mother had always been the embodiment of control, of absolute power, and to defy her was to risk everything. But as she stood there, with the eyes of the court upon her, Zora knew that something had shifted within her. The empire, the court, the crown, they all felt distant now, like a world she no longer belonged to. The queen stood motionless for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she studied her daughter. Zora could see the battle raging behind her mother's gaze. The queen, the ruler of Threxion, who had always demanded obedience, now forced to confront the unthinkable. Her daughter was not the docile figure she had trained her to be. She was something more. "You have made a grave mistake," the queen said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "This is not the way of our people. The throne requires loyalty, power, and obedience. You choose something else." Zora held her ground, her eyes never leaving her mother's. "I choose truth, mother. I choose what is real." The queen took a step closer, her presence more imposing than ever. "And you believe you can stand alone?" Her voice was tinged with a hint of something Zora hadn't expected, uncertainty. "I'm not alone," Zora replied, her voice steady. "I have learned that the people who sweep the floors, who work in the shadows, are the ones who keep the world turning. It's not the throne that holds us up. It's the truth we all carry, no matter who we are." The queen's eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too, a flicker of something she couldn't quite suppress. "You speak of the common people, of laborers and janitors, as if they are equal to royalty. You have no idea what it means to rule, Zora." Zora met her mother's gaze without flinching. "I understand more than you think, mother. I understand what it means to feel invisible, to be seen as nothing but a pawn in a game of power. But the truth is, we are all connected. Every life, no matter how small or how large, matters. And I will not be a part of a world that forgets that." The queen's expression hardened, her eyes turning cold again. "You are my daughter, Zora, but you are no longer my heir." The words hit Zora like a physical blow, but they did not break her. She had known this might come. She had known that defying her mother meant losing everything she had ever known. But in this moment, Zora realized that the true power was not in what she stood to lose, but in what she had already gained: the truth of who she was, and the courage to stand by it. The queen's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, her lips tight with fury. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her robe sweeping behind her like a storm cloud. Zora remained where she stood, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over her. The court, the empire, her mother, they were all distant now. She had chosen her path, and the future, whatever it held, was hers to shape. The days that followed Zora's defiance were filled with a tension she couldn't escape. Her mother's wrath was a silent storm, the kind that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting to strike. The queen did not speak to her directly, but Zora felt the weight of her decision in every glance, every whisper that passed through the palace halls. It was as if the entire empire had held its breath, waiting for Zora to falter, for her to return to her place at her mother's side. But Zora did not falter. She spent more time in the lower corridors, more time with the servants and workers who had always been invisible to the eyes of the court. She was learning something in those moments, something her mother had never taught her. It was in the way the janitors and laborers moved, in the quiet resilience they carried with them. They didn't seek recognition, didn't yearn for power. They worked because it was what needed to be done, and in that, Zora saw a deeper strength than she had ever known. Elias, too, had become more than just a quiet presence in her life. He was a guide in a world Zora had never truly understood. She learned from him not just the importance of work, but the dignity in it. She learned that power wasn't about the throne, it was about the quiet acts of resistance, the moments when you refused to bend. But there was still the queen to face. Zora knew the moment would come when she would have to make her final stand. She had defied her mother once, but it wasn't enough. She had to break the chains that held her to this life of pretense and power. She had to prove that her voice, her choices, meant something. One evening, as the palace lay cloaked in the quiet hum of the night, Zora found herself once again standing before the queen's chambers. The door was slightly ajar, and the faint sound of the queen's voice drifted out, low and muffled. Zora hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment that would determine her future. She pushed the door open slowly, stepping into the dimly lit room. The queen was seated at her desk, her back turned, but Zora could feel her presence, felt the weight of her authority pressing down on the air between them. "I know why you're here," the queen said, her voice cold and clipped. She did not look up. Zora took a deep breath. "I'm not here to beg, Mother. I'm here to claim my place, not by your will, but by my own." The queen turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as they met Zora's. "You're a fool to think you can live without me, without this empire. You are nothing without the throne." "I am more than the throne," Zora replied, her voice steady. "I am more than a title, more than a crown. I am my own person, and I will no longer be bound by your chains." The queen's eyes flickered with something that might have been fear, but she quickly masked it, her expression hardening once more. "Then you have made your choice," she said softly, "and you will live with the consequences." Zora nodded, not out of defiance, but out of a quiet understanding. She had already made her choice, and for the first time, she felt free. The next morning, the palace was abuzz with whispers. Zora could feel the change in the air, the shift that had come with her defiance, with the choice she had made. The halls, once filled with the clatter of royalty and the hum of politics, now felt quieter, as if the empire itself was holding its breath. Zora knew that her mother would not let this stand. The queen would not be content with a daughter who refused to bow to the weight of the throne, but Zora had already seen the truth. She had seen it in the workers, in Elias, and in herself. The truth that the queen had tried to bury for so long, that power was not held by crowns or thrones, but by the quiet strength of those who chose to live their truth, no matter the cost. She stood before the grand window of the palace, staring out at the endless horizon. The sky was streaked with shades of violet and gold, a reflection of the galaxy's infinite possibilities. The world stretched before her, vast and unknowable. She felt small in the grand scheme of things, but for the first time, she didn't mind. She was no longer trapped in a cage of expectations. She was free. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. She turned to see Elias standing at the door, his face calm, yet carrying the weight of something unspoken. "You've made your choice," he said softly, stepping into the room. "And you're not alone." Zora smiled at him, a sense of peace settling over her. "I know. It's strange, though. For the first time, I feel like I'm truly seeing the world." Elias nodded, his eyes warm. "Sometimes it's the quiet ones who see the most clearly." Zora walked toward him, her gaze unwavering. "I was born into a world of power and titles, but I've realized something important. It's not the throne that shapes us, it's the choices we make, the truths we stand by." He gave her a small, approving smile. "And the people we choose to listen to." Zora looked out at the galaxy once more. "It's funny, I thought the empire was the center of everything, that the throne was where all the power lay. But now, I see it differently. The power doesn't come from control, it comes from understanding." A long silence followed, one that stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Zora knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The queen would fight, and the court would not forgive her. But it no longer mattered. The truth had been revealed, and it was one that no amount of power or influence could silence. "Zora," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm, "you've already changed the galaxy, and now you have the chance to lead it with the strength of truth, not the fear of the throne." Zora looked at him, the man who had quietly guided her to this moment. She nodded, her heart filled with quiet resolve. It's time to make that truth known. And so, with one final glance at the empire she was born to, Zora walked out of the palace, into the vast unknown. The galaxy was waiting, and for the first time, it felt like it was hers to shape.